Hi everyone. It's nice to see so many people here already joining us. Welcome to today's session on developing inclusive leaders from day one. I'm Sophie and I'm a member of the Go One marketing team, and I'm thrilled to be your host today for today's webinar. Before we start the session, I want to give a minute or two for people to join and get settled in. So in the meantime, I'd love to ask you a question and get your answer in chat. It's great to see so many of you talking already. Audrey, our wonderful speaker today, is a really talented musician and she plays multiple instruments. So I'd love to know, do you play any instruments? If yes, pop it in the chat. If not, which instrument have you always wanted to learn? I would really want to know. Me personally, I've always wanted to learn the guitar, but it's always been on my list and I've never gotten around to it. So I think that's definitely something I need to tick off this year. I'd love to know what instruments everyone plays or if they want to learn to play something. So I'll give that a few moments. Welcome to everyone joining. Flute, that's really cool. Emily wants to learn the piano. Saxophone, that's really cool, Jess. Banjo, wow, very talented group of people today. That's amazing. I love how musical everybody is. That's great. Welcome everyone joining us. Oh, Wendy, that's great that you're learning to play guitar. Oh, everyone's so musical. That's amazing. I also would love to learn the guitar as well. I think we've got a good group of people here today. Banjo is amazing. I think that might be our most unique instrument so far. So looks like we've got a great crowd. Let's get started. So again, I'm Sophie from Go One. I'm a member of the marketing team. And if you're new to Go One, welcome. We're a learning content aggregator. So essentially we bring together a huge range of online training for employees all in one place. So that includes everything from compliance, health and safety, leadership, communication, and personal development skills. You name it, we've got it. And I'm so glad you could join us today for such an insightful session with lots of valuable takeaways. So I want to extend a really warm welcome to our speaker, Audrey Pantelis, who will be sharing practical strategies for building inclusive leadership into onboarding from day one. We'll be diving into the key traits of inclusive leaders and how these qualities impact team dynamics and culture. And as we go along, please feel free to drop your questions for Audrey into the Q&A box, which looks like a question mark. We'll do our best to get through as many as possible during our Q&A at the end. With that, I'm going to hand over the virtual mic to Audrey. I'm going to add her onto stage and our slides as well. So welcome, Audrey.
Hello and good afternoon, or welcome to everybody today. Obviously, we're all watching or viewing this at different times, and some of you will be, watching this at an asynchronous time. So, with regards to that, it's a pleasure to be with you today, and many thanks to Sophie. Glad that Sophie is going to be assisting me as we go through this session, and also as well the idea that we're going to be able to have some time to answer your questions as well. So yeah, I encourage you to use the Q&A box and to put your questions in there, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as we can before effectively I get booted out. So here we are, developing inclusive leaders from day one. We're going to go on to the next slide, and it's as I say, very good to have you here. And I'm assuming I can move those slides along. Let's assume I can. Oh, yes, I can. Brilliant. So just a little bit about who I am and what I do, because some of you may have seen me before, but some of you, and probably quite a lot of you, haven't. My name is Audrey Pantelis, and I am an inclusion trainer. I'm a facilitator, and I'm also a speaker. I've got over 30 years of experience working in educational leadership. So that's kind of the core of where I have gained my spurs, as it were. I was the founding head of a brand new special needs school, so special educational needs and disabilities school, and we, or rather I, because it was a brand new school and it started from scratch, I effectively developed it from, the systems, the inclusive systems, the processes, all the way from the very beginning. So it was a blank piece of paper and I kind of set it all up. And it's that, if you like, that at the time I didn't know how valuable it was going to be, but it's that's kind of also inspires and is the grounding for the work that I do now. So my job now as the Director of Elevation Coaching and Consulting enables me to kind of leverage the expertise that I've gained in the work that I did in my special needs school. And what I now do is I work with organisations and I kind of enhance employee engagement. So the things that we're going to be talking about today, that's kind of my bag now. And I think about it and doing this through strategic diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives. And I'm passionate about it. As you will learn as I go through it, I kind of really get into it. And I'm a big believer in these initiatives, these strategies being the essence of increasing productivity and reducing attrition rates. So it's about fostering and building up and creating those fantastic workplace cultures, which are not easy to do. They're not easy to do at all. But if it's boosting productivity, as we've said, if it's all of these things are inspiring mindset shifts, which I think is probably one of the biggest things to kind of, if we're trying to turn boats around, it's one of the hardest things to do. And building that trust and enabling, organizations to transform their idea of, this is what we intend to do, into actually doing it and becoming meaningful in your actions. That's really what I'm all about. That's what I'm all about. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what are we going to cover in the next 45 minutes or so? So we're going to be thinking about the whole concept of inclusion and inclusiveness or inclusivity. These are words that are used so often, aren't they? They are used so often, and people will drop them into sentences. They will say, yeah, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. But how often do we really know whether we're doing it really well? So you can see on the slide there, what we're going to be covering, as Sophie's already reiterated as well. So we know it's a great trait, we know it's a great intention, but how do you get it right? And so we're going to be thinking about it as a process when we're thinking about it from the onboarding point of view. We're going to be thinking about it as a leader, so thinking about skills, thinking about behaviors that we need to develop, show, know, and also as a practice when we're thinking about it from a culture kind of perspective, and remembering that culture is not just one person, it's not just the leader doing it, it's everybody doing it. And so that's what we're going to be thinking about today, and you can see there those key points on the slide there about what we're going to be covering. So let's get into it. We've got a poll. So what we're going to be doing, first of all, to make sure that, number one, I'm not just talking to myself and I'm talking to some good people out there, let's find out what you know. So Sophie is going to share the poll in a minute. It's going to go onto the screen to get us thinking about the first of these three areas that we're going to be looking at today. So we're thinking about onboarding in the first instance. So this is the way in which I'd like you to operate. So for those of you that have already started voting, you can see there, and that's great. The question there, how long is a good amount of time for an onboarding program? Really interesting. I found this fascinating. I'll give you the answer, do not worry, in a minute, but let's get those votes in. And it's interesting because at the moment it's looking like we're hedging our bets, and most people are feeling the 3 months is kind of a thing. And of course you might want to be thinking, as you're voting, you might be thinking to yourself, maybe I'm thinking about this from my own perspective, as somebody who maybe designs your onboarding program. Maybe you're thinking about it from somebody who's just gone through it, and you're remembering your experiences and thinking, okay, yeah, that's cool. Or you might actually just be thinking, I have no clue and I'm guessing. I don't mind, whichever perspective you want to come into. So I'm going to assume we're still getting a couple of little few tweaks going on there. I quite like that. I love that. But I'm going to just double checking here as these last numbers are coming in. When we need to stop. So maybe it'll be good to just know from Sophie, maybe if you can give me a thumbs up that we're good to take that as our final answers. Okay, it's gone off the there. Okay, so we had 3 months, But actually, I was a bit sneaky there, because the real answer was not 1 month, it wasn't 3 months, it wasn't 6 months, it's 12 months. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, my goodness me, really? That long? But it really is. It really is. And yeah, it's, and you know what, 3 months would be, I think that would have been I think that's an intelligent guess, and so I would have gone with that. I might even have stuck out my neck and thought for 6, but actually, according to the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, 69% of employees stick with a company for around 3 years if their induction is around 12 months. So what that looks like is variable, and we're going to discuss a little bit about that now. But that's the optimum. So maybe there's going to be some, wriggle room there about how maybe that can be played with. And in a way, what I'm giving you is some suggestions. Doesn't mean to say that that's what you've got to do as well. So I'm recognizing, I can see in the chat there, somebody's made the comment, and rightly so. Thank you, Gabriella, that, companies wouldn't want to spend that long. But equally, I suppose my challenge to that would be, there needs to be some form of change, because obviously if the attrition rate is going where you are finding people are leaving and walking out the door easily, then it may well be that might need to be considered. Whether it's a 12-month period, who knows? And that is obviously contextual. But when you think back to your own first week at work, did you feel truly welcomed? Did you feel as if actually, you felt that you were onboarded well? And I'm not necessarily going to get your answers right now, but it's something just to consider, because I think for a lot of us, we forget how it goes when we are new. We really forget it, don't we? We often looks like we think, let's get people through the process, and we treat it like a process. But actually, when we are not new, we carry with us, those of us that are within the organization already, all of that institutional knowledge. We've got so much. So sometimes when we're thinking about how we need to get that out, we're just thinking, get it out quickly, and then let's move it on. But actually, these are some of the questions that you can see on the slide there that the new hire, the employee, is thinking about as they join. And these are the things that actually they probably want answered, but of course they're not going to necessarily be able to, get that out. And so we have to think empathetically about that, not just seeing it as a process, not just seeing it as something to get through. They need to recognize that what they are seeing, what they are hearing, what they are valuing about the organization that has got them to the point where they're actually now wanting to work for you and have succeeded in, becoming an employee. These are the things that they now, almost, if you like, a bit like when you're buying something new, you want to make sure that, I've made the right decision. I've done the right thing. And so I think that's something to really consider, something to really take on board as we're thinking about onboarding. So also thinking about what they're coming into. So are they going to be able to make that valuable contribution to the organization? Is there a match between what they saw at interview and what they saw going on as they came into the organization, and them being in the organization? Making sure there is actually a match. And also, what are they coming into? The context. How do they get that straight away? How do they get that in such a way that means that, yes, I can now come into this and this makes sense to me. This makes me feel as if I can be valued, that I can make that valuable contribution. And how are they going to connect with other people within the organization that, yes, of course, that are immediately within their range, within their grasp, within their groups, but then also across the organization, so that it doesn't get to a year, 2 years, and then suddenly they're meeting somebody for the first time. Now, obviously, all of this needs a balance, because you can't do everything straight away. But these are some of the things that they need to make sure are happening to ensure that inclusivity. And of course, it can be drip fed throughout that period of onboarding. So it could be over a year, or it could be over 6 months, or it could be over 8 months, depending on what it is that we are thinking about with regards to that inclusive onboarding, and how it really does matter. It's not just a process. So when thinking about those pillars of an inclusive onboarding process, I thought about 3 things: representation, accessibility, and support systems. But you'll also notice on the slide there that I've got an image of what looks like people wandering around chairs and some musical notes there, which kind of doesn't allude to our opening question about musicality. But I was really thinking about this and thinking about the idea that onboarding is a bit like the game that you can see effectively being indicated on the image there of musical chairs. And the analogy I have, or that I'm thinking about, is the idea that when you're playing musical chairs, you have to stop the music, don't you? So we're all wandering around the chairs. You have to stop them. You have to stop the music, that is. You then have to either take away a chair, and you have to make sure that we're going to play this game again. The chair is going away, and it's clear about what it is that you're doing. I believe there is a similarity with that when you are onboarding, because effectively what you can't do is just throw people into the game and just say, yeah, get it. Yeah, understand it. Yeah, don't worry about whether you know the music or not. Don't worry about whether you know whether the chairs are there or not. Just crack on. And too often we do this with onboarding. We just think, okay, it's ongoing. We're doing the things, just jump in. When actually we need to be really clear. So I'm thinking about these 3 pillars here. And if you're wanting inclusivity to be meaningful, if you want it to be real, if you want it to be, something that is not just tokenistic, then these 3 pillars will help you enable your onboarding program to be as inclusive as it can be. And it's important to know what's in place. So you're thinking about not only the inclusivity aspect for all employees, regardless of their diversity traits, etc., but you're also thinking about those who are minoritized, those who have protected characteristics, or what do we call them, diversity traits. You're thinking about that. And you're also thinking about people who maybe don't have anything with regards to diversity traits or protected characteristics, but they want to be allies, they want to be advocates for those that aren't. And there'll be people that kind of straddle some of those different aspects. So let's go through these 3 pillars. So when we're thinking about representation, I think one of the biggest things that we've actually got to do is to be honest. All too often we can, if you like, wheel out the things that we're doing when we're thinking about representation. Maybe we make sure we bring out our people of color, and we show that we've got 1, 2, few. Maybe we bring out our people who maybe have, a physical disability or whatever it is, and we show that we're doing it, but actually it's tokenistic and it's not real. I think be honest. Talk about the work that still needs to be done. So reflect that diversity of your workforce, but also say, yeah, we've still got some stuff to do on this. Talk about some employee stories and testimonials that show and reflect those differences, and how it's worked for you, or maybe show that actually it's not working as well as we'd like, but actually we know that we want to do better in this area. So I think with representation, that's really what we're trying to do there. Too often I work with organizations that want to say how amazing it is with their one person, and it's not down to that one person to be the representative for all people of color, for all people with disabilities, for all LGBTQ IA plus employees. It's not down to that. So represent what you can and be honest with what you've got, and then start to think about the ways in which maybe you can improve that. But starting off by talking about where you're going, what you're doing well and what you're not doing so well, I think is really key. Another pillar of inclusive onboarding is also thinking about accessibility. So I'm showing the symbol there for accessibility, which of course is important. And we're thinking about that. If we're thinking about it from a physical point of view, of course, it's brilliant to make sure that, all areas of the organization are accessible to all. But also thinking about it with regards to those different schedules, those different formats, the different ways in which you can communicate to accommodate those different working styles. And we've done this already. We know that this works. If we think about COVID, which now seems like such a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago when we were thinking to ourselves, how do we make sure that we can't all be in the same place, but how can we make sure that we can accommodate everybody to keep our businesses going? And we were accessible then. We still have elements of that accessibility going on now, but invariably, of course, we've got hybrid things going on now. We've got to make it work for the organization. When we're onboarding, we've got to think about those different ways in which we can ensure that people are learning as well as they might. So while we talked about the idea of 12 months being quite a long time, but actually, could onboarding still be stuff that happens at home, where it's online learning? Could it be where it's sessions that take place at different times? Could it be that asynchronous learning that enables people to access it as and when? These things are probably all in place in organizations now, but maybe we need to think about it less from a, right, it all has to happen within this time and this space, and we can elongate that. So it keeps that sense of learning and progression going. And we're also thinking about the formats, the ways in which we're doing it. What we're trying to do, of course, is to make it as easy as possible for your new hires to effectively fall in love with your organization. If we think about it from a relationship point of view, think about what we do when we are meeting somebody for the first time. We put out all the good stuff, don't we? The good cutlery comes out. The best of how we are is shown. But what we need to do is, while that is great and it's lovely, we also need to make sure that we keep it going, and that it doesn't wane after 3 months or 6 months, and that we keep it going, and actually it becomes part of the culture of what we do. We want people to fall in love. So how do we make people fall in love? We show them our best, and we show them our intentions about how brilliant we can be and how wonderful it can be. So accessibility, I think, is really important as a key pillar of inclusive onboarding. Another, or rather the third key pillar, is support systems. So invariably, we put up support systems. Sometimes we put these things together when something has happened. Sometimes things have happened and we are struggling and we're thinking, right, we better do that, we better do that, we better do that. But actually, if we have these things in place and we keep them moving, we keep them active, we keep them alive, we want to create those safe spaces. So it could include things like having, ERGs, those employee resource groups, these focus groups that enable people to be able to feed back, and recognizing what that looks like. We'll talk a little bit more as we progress about what that will look like as we try to hear more voices, but creating those safe spaces and recognizing what they are and keeping them safe so that people can utilize them well. Usually there is a lack of trust if people don't use ERGs or focus groups as well as they might, simply because they're not sure about where it goes. And that psychological safety, which again I will make some more reference to, can sometimes kind of hinder the progress. Pairing new hires with trained buddies or mentors, and actually having the training for that, so that it's something that goes on. Yes, it's an additional thing to do, but if you're wanting to invest in people and keep that employee engagement real, then it will mean that you're going to have to kind of push the boat out somewhat. So that means training buddies so that they know what they're doing. And so that actually the information that they're gaining from being a buddy kind of feeds into the onboarding process. And so we can say, yeah, we tried that, we did that, that didn't work. Okay, right, now we're going to do this, the next round of onboarding we're going to do it slightly differently. We're just going to tweak something. We're going to add something. We're going to take something away. Think about that musical chairs analogy, about not just throwing people in and thinking, well, this is what we did, so this is how it's going to work. We're happy to change the music sometimes. We're happy to change maybe the type of what's the word? The type of music that we're using, the type of chair that we're using, in order to make sure that actually these things work for us. And signposting more than once. One of the things I'm learning as an entrepreneur is that you can't say what you do once and then hope that everyone's heard it. My coach was talking to me about this yesterday, and we were talking about the idea that you have to repeat yourself more than once. So this is the thing, you have to be repeating it. And it might feel a little dull, but actually it's not dull, it's needed. And remembering that onboarding means that people will come in at different times. You've got to make sure that you are repeating your message so that number one, it becomes consistent. So those three pillars, when we're thinking about representation, when we're thinking about accessibility, the different ways in which people can access and feedback, and then also creating those support systems and enabling those safe spaces, I think are key in making sure that your onboarding processes are inclusive and actively inclusive. So with that in mind, we're going to go on to the next part of our session, and we've got another poll for you, another one. So I'm going to ask the lovely Sophie to get our next poll ready. And the question is, what do you think is the key trait of inclusive leaders? And you've got 4 options there: empathy, active listening, self-awareness, and adaptability. Do vote now. Let me know what you think is the key trait of inclusive leaders. And it is great. I do love this. I love the live elements of this, of watching people put their votes in. I suppose it is one of the modern things that we have now with regards to of technology today. And somebody has rightly said, where is all of the above? I'm just going to ask you to hold your horses, Jeffrey. Do not worry. We will be addressing them. But I'm asking you just to choose what you think is the key trait of inclusive leaders. So effectively, I'm asking you to select one. So I think we have a tie at the moment between empathy and self-awareness. Oh, yep, empathy and self-awareness are kind of tying together. And then we've got active listening and adaptability also tying for second place. But let's see what we're doing there. Okay. I now know that when the poll is finished, it will go back to my slides. So that's the vote that we've got at the moment. These are the results that we've got sitting there, and the poll is closed. Thank you very much there. And we've got joint first place, empathy and self-awareness, and active listening and adaptability as second place. So Jeffrey, I'm going to tell you automatically that all of them we are going to talk about in a minute now. So they are all key traits, but the one main key trait is actually self-awareness. And it's the one of the 4 that we're going to unpack. We're going to unpack all of them now. So you're absolutely right in identifying that all 4 of them are key traits, but the one that moves the needle more than ever, or more than most, is self-awareness. And we're going to discuss why that is the case. Self-awareness is the key inclusive leadership trait, particularly when we're thinking about our own biases and our own privilege. So let's unpack that a little bit more. Let's look at empathy and active listening. So if you are an inclusive leader, and if you like, if you're thinking about some of those traits that you're thinking, right, okay, do I have these? So if you like, you're creating your own little checklist now with regards to this. It's about thinking about what these people do, what inclusive leaders do. So when we're thinking about empathy and active listening, we're thinking about the idea that inclusive leaders are listening to understand, not just to speak. And that's a hard one, isn't it, sometimes as a leader? And definitely something that I had to develop rapidly, that as a leader, sometimes we want to have all the answers and we want to be able to give out those answers straight away. But we need to be able to hear what our employees are saying to them. And we have to be able to make sure that we are taking the time to understand those different lived experiences and perspectives. And that can be challenging at times, because we have to recognize that these different viewpoints, these different perspectives, which may be totally alien to us, that may not sit well with us. Sometimes they don't sit well with us because we just don't have that experience. But we also have to recognize that, because actually these are all, if you like, a bit like in the way that we can look at a particular situation and we can see all these different viewpoints. Different viewpoints are helpful in ordering to look at it with regards to the whole. And absolutely they are, Michael, thank you in the chat there. These are elements of emotional intelligence, 100%. And the impact of empathy and active listening, of course, is that when teams feel heard and respected, then this is building that trust, that psychological safety. And so we need that. Sounds obvious to many of us, but you'll be surprised. And I have to tell you, in literally in the last couple of days, the conversations I've had with different leaders where these are not present, they are not present in the workforce. And so it's, again, that whole repetitious nature that we have to have when we're thinking about inclusive leadership, and about how we have to reiterate it time and time again through our behaviors. So through empathy, that the understanding of those different perspectives, being able to see it from those different viewpoints, and valuing those diverse voices, which, remember, recognizing that they're going to be different to us. They may challenge us, but we actually have to make sure that, number one, we take them on board, and then actually we are able to make those people feel seen, heard, and valued. The impact, of course, is that we are trying to increase that sense of trust, belonging, and psychological safety. So empathy and active listening is really key. The other two, of course, with self-awareness being, of course, that key thing there, it's the key trait that enables adaptability in a way. So without that self-awareness, without the recognition that we acknowledge that actually what we are thinking isn't always right, we can't be adaptable. We can't adjust our approaches for inclusivity if we're thinking that our way is the only way, the right way. So we need to acknowledge what we don't know. We also need to lead with curiosity. And talking about curiosity, and I'll come to that in a minute when I'm talking about some research that kind of enables this to be the case. We need to make sure that the impact of having adaptability and self-awareness enables us to create that culture where we are learning, and the growth that happens within that culture, it's valued over the idea of perfection. We've spent a lot of time, I think, within leadership not being as curious as we might want to be, and thinking that we have to have the answers. And that, of course, is the difference between leadership and management. Management, where sometimes we're just thinking we've just got to get the things done, we've got to get it right, and that's it. Leadership is recognition that actually we're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to have all of the answers. And we know that with leadership and with curiosity, that actually if we're exploring, that we're all able to explore, we're all able to bring these different perspectives in. There is not a one size fits all, but there are different ways, if you like, to approach the problem. The main thing is problem solving and actually getting that end result completely, I suppose, viewed from different viewpoints, and then a consensus with that curiosity in mind. And I'll talk a little bit more about curiosity now, in the fact that different the two key, if you like, pillars of, if you like, research, one from Deloitte, where they were talking about the 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership, included curiosity, and also Harvard Business Review on bias awareness talks about the whole idea, of course, of leaders to be aware of their biases. When we're talking from the Deloitte point of view, when they're talking about their 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership, they include courage, which of course falls into that self-awareness, I think, part, because I think you have to have that courage to step out and think, okay, right, I'm gonna say here that I don't quite know what it is that I need to know. I'm recognizing that my biases are putting me in a particular viewpoint. Also thinking about collaboration and creating that space, because there's vulnerability in all of this going on here. And I think that's also possibly a barrier as to why being inclusive is sometimes, we can talk about it, but the actual doing of it sometimes makes us feel a little bit hesitant. That curiosity, as we've talked about, you know, the willingness to step into new areas and to think, I'm not quite sure what this looks like, but I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to step into an area of vulnerability here. We've talked about bias, and we've talked about the idea of that self-awareness piece, and also that, if you like, one of the C's for under the 6 traits from the Deloitte signature traits of inclusive leadership is about the idea of the cognizance of bias. So just even being aware of that. And again, for me, in the work that I do, it feels quite kind of intuitive now, that to recognize that bias is there. But sometimes when we admit that we've got biases, and remember, we're not trying to eliminate bias, because we're not going to. We are not going to eliminate bias in any of us. Biases are part of who we are, part of how we think. So what we're trying to do is to be cognizant of our biases and to manage our biases as best as we can. So that means an acknowledgement of them. Sometimes people will think that biases are things that we've got to eliminate, and that's trying to eliminate part of us, and that's not what we're about at all. We shouldn't be trying to do that. We also need to think about the commitment, and the commitment of, when we're thinking about inclusive leadership, of seeing it through. And another area that also happens to begin with a C, that I'm very much into, and this is some part, definitely a huge part of the work that I do, is about cultural intelligence, and the idea that all of the different ways in which we work, all of the different spaces and places that we have come from when we do this work, how we can bring them together, and how we bring them together in such a way that it doesn't cause conflict, but it enables us to kind of to be able to move forward. So those 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership, as according to research by Deloitte: courage, collaboration, curiosity, cognizance of bias, commitment, and cultural intelligence, all help in that self-awareness piece as well. So alongside Harvard's business review on bias awareness and the idea that leaders need to be aware of their biases, these are all add up to, if you like, those key traits of inclusive leaders. Yes, emotional intelligence, 100%. And I think they are things that we have to kind of work towards. They are not things that are going to happen easily. And I think the more we talk about them, the more aware we are of them, the easier it becomes as we help our employees to also do the same. So if we are modeling inclusivity in our leadership traits and our behaviors, then we're going to see some of that coming out with regards to employee engagement. So that leads us, if you like, nicely onto, if you like, the third area. And when we're thinking about how do we hear everyone's voice, it's about thinking about these 3 key areas here. So we're just about to come into land here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. And I think really it's about the concept when we're thinking especially about psychological safety. And it's a phrase that I'm sure that you have come across before. But I think, if you like, if I break it down into kind of some basic terms for those of you that maybe haven't, it's that concept that if everyone in the room agrees with one another, it may well be that you haven't quite got enough diversity. And so that possibly is a bit of a generic statement, and it's possibly a bit of a sweeping statement even, because there may well be contextually the reasons why everyone is all agreeing. But generally speaking, when we are thinking about the idea that there is opportunities where people all automatically think the same, so that groupthink concept, maybe there are a couple of people within the group, within the team, who have got dominant voices and we hear them quite a lot of the time. Or maybe everyone's come from the same place, and so subsequently everyone thinks the same, so that groupthink is there. So as a result, any biases towards decision making are kind of one and the same, and so there is an automatic default, if you like, to thinking that way. It may well be that psychological safety, the idea that the belief that one if it's not apparent, that is, that that you're not going to be punished for thinking differently, it may well be that those things that I've said earlier enable people just to think to themselves, well, that's just the way it goes, and so this is just how it's going to be. So psychological safety, where you can think differently, where there aren't dominant voices necessarily, and that the biases and decision making are challenged, is ultimately what we're looking for. I know that from earlier times when I was an early leader, when I was a new leader, that I used to think that consensus was great. I used to think that if we were all consensual and we all agreed with everything, then that was a fantastic thing to have happen. When actually, was it? And now, of course, I can recognize that that isn't necessarily the case. And as somebody has said in there, thank you, Sabina, or intimidated into being yes people, 100%. It's a really, I think it's one of these subtle, quiet, insidious kind of behaviors and traits that can happen over time. And so why we now need to kind of challenge that is because team members need to be able to feel that they can speak up without feeling shamed. And we also know that it still continues now, that people don't do it. I've not done it. And as a Black woman, sometimes I have found myself thinking I better shrink, I better keep my voice small. So thinking about other minoritized employees, thinking about other employees where they might feel engaged or at certain times, thinking I better not say that, is something that has to be really thought about if we're thinking about inclusion in its truest sense. And so we need to ensure that all ideas are valued, whether they are used or not. There needs to be mechanisms and ways in which that can be managed, but people must feel a way in which they can do that. One of the things that I used to also do, especially in the school that I set up from scratch, when we used to create any form of strategic piece of work where we were thinking about the plans for the next academic year, etc., I used to work with my teams to ensure that all stakeholders had a chance to be able to speak. All stakeholders had a chance to be able to move that forward and give their views. Whether we could include them or not wasn't really the point at the time. It was about making sure people were seen, heard, and valued. Because actually, even if it couldn't be included at the time, it could be used in a different way at a different time. But if I didn't ask the questions, I wouldn't get the answers. And so I made sure that people had a chance to air their views, even if it didn't directly impact them. So that's one of the things that we can also think about. Structured discussions is another area as well. And I know we're coming up towards the time when we need to start thinking about finishing. So I'm not going to rush these last 2 points, but I am going to encourage you to kind of to think deeper about that and to maybe go on and do some additional work on this yourselves once this webinar is finished. But with regards to structured discussions, thinking about the ways in which we can make sure that we capture those voices, if it's always done the same way, you're always going to get the same results. So doing what you've always done will get you what you've always got. So one of the ways in which I think that we can make sure that we hear every voice is to think about structured discussions. Now, that might be different things for different stakeholders, but ultimately what you're thinking about is the idea of having that clear purpose for your discussion when you are having them. Having a facilitative approach. So rather than somebody saying, this is how we're going to do it, it may well be that somebody just steers the conversation so that it doesn't turn into a free-for-all, so that it doesn't turn into a bun fight, it doesn't turn into something where people come to harm, so that it actually becomes a safe an environment for people to be able to share their views. And those agreed ground rules are in place. So some of those practices might include things like circle practice. So circle practice simply being, and I know it sounds again really simple, but you'll be surprised at certain discussions that happen in organizations where everyone speaks and everyone is allowed to speak, and not with people crossing over them or talking over them. It's one of my biggest bugbears about people speaking over one another, or somebody speaking over me. I find it incredibly rude. That's my own personal values. So I make sure that when I'm facilitating discussions, that people have a chance to speak and be able to say what they need without thinking someone's just going to come and talk over them. So I make that one of my ground rules when I'm having those structured discussions. Another area that might be, and you don't have to do all of these may be something that you do in one at a time. You might also want to think about the 1, 2, 4 and all structured discussion. So maybe an idea that you give where you ask someone to think about it for a number of minutes on their own, and then maybe they pair up and working in 2s, maybe they then get into small groups of 4, and then maybe we share all of those ideas together. So it's a build up of thinking, and that enables people to be able to have their own thoughts, which they can then express. And I really like that idea of the 1, 2, 4 all. It's definitely something that we use in the classroom a lot, and I used to use in the classroom a lot. So it's something that maybe could be used in a way in organizations if it's not already done. And it might sound a little schoolish, but actually, do you know what? It can work really well. And also the third idea of having maybe a case clinic or scenarios where you actually use a scenario and you discuss it and you think about the ways in which that can be unpacked. That's also really helpful as well. And maybe it's a hypothetical one, maybe it's a real one, a real situation. But these things really are supportive. The final area where you can make sure that you can hear every voice, of course, is the reverse mentoring concept, which of course I know is gaining popularity and gaining traction in organizations. But with the 4 key features of reverse mentoring, it's just really thinking about the mentor-mentee role reversal, so switching it around, so not thinking about seniority necessarily being the only way forward, because actually, again, when you're hearing everyone's voice, you are gaining some real gems from people who may well not necessarily have the experience, but maybe they've just got that different way of thinking. Second area of reverse mentoring of key feature is just the focusing on that active listening piece and thinking about the feedback that can be given and the ways in which feedback can be given. Also, the idea of making sure, especially when we're thinking about relationships, that cross-generational approach. Getting people who know what they're doing already, people who maybe don't know what they're doing as much, and maybe just combining it and actually getting that information together and actually thinking, okay, this is what I've known, this is what I've been doing for the last 20 years. But how does somebody see it when they've just come in? How does somebody see it when they've been doing it for a little while? And what are some of the pitfalls that they're starting to find? So these things are really helpful. And also that intercultural learning, which of course lends itself well to cultural intelligence as well. And ultimately, with reverse mentoring, we are thinking about relationships. We're thinking about the ways in which people work together. And without that fundamental kind of understanding about relationships, it's almost like, what are we doing? Why are we working together if we haven't got those relationship fundamentals grounded really well? So these are just some of the ways in which we can reverse mentor and reverse mentoring well, and why we are doing it. So just before we go into our Q&A and before we go even into our final slide, just something I'd love you to do for me just before we finish. If you are able, if you can either, if you need to screenshot this will be something really helpful for me. I tend to find when I'm trying to get feedback, trying to gather it after the event is sometimes a little bit tricky. And so I'm trying something out here where I can try and get it as we go. And we are going to have some time for Q&A. So it'll be good for you, obviously, to listen to the Q&A and to get some of those answers in. But if you can get this bit of feedback done for me, I would be eternally grateful. I really would. And I'm sure if you are watching this another time, don't worry, do it. It doesn't expire. So if you're watching it on your desktop and you can get your phone and you can scan the QR code, it will get you the questions and it's really quick. Or if you're not, if you want to have maybe the code there, that'll be great. Make sure that you put the right code in to make sure that you get the right questions. That'll be really, really helpful for me. So thank you so much for that in advance. And thank you very much, Michael, for connecting with me on LinkedIn, because my LinkedIn details are also there as well, because you will mostly find me there. So let's conclude now as we start to come into land before we get into some Q&A. So when we are thinking about the different areas that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so, we've been thinking about onboarding, we've been thinking about those key inclusive leadership traits, and we've also been thinking about how do we hear all of these voices together. So what are we thinking about? We're thinking about continuous feedback. We want to make sure that as we are onboarding people together, as we are getting people to come in and to fall in love with our organization, be it on that 12-month section, we really need to think about how people have found that process and how that we now want to try and get people to, if you like, contribute to the ongoing concept of onboarding. So continuous feedback. That's what we're really looking for now. We really want to make sure that happens. We also want to make sure that the resources that we are using, that they are relevant. To be ready to discard things that haven't worked quite as well. When you're getting your feedback, you might find, do you know what? That didn't work as well. We're not going to do that. We're going to kind of discard that, and we're going to think about something slightly different and doing it a slightly different way. Maybe introduce something, or maybe let things go. You don't always have to do all the things all the time. So also checking your materials and your resources to make sure that they are not biased, and they will be from time to time. And so, audit them, check your onboarding content for bias, make sure that you're being as bias-free as you can be. And where you're seeing it, do something about it where you can from the feedback that you're getting. For your leaders, thinking about those regular training updates. Being an inclusive leader is not easy. And, things change from time to time. And so making sure that people are being as up to date as they can be, thinking about those 6 leadership traits when we were thinking about the Deloitte inclusive leadership traits. That's helpful to have in the background, but those 4 key ones that I gave you, I think, even if you are just enabling people to meet together and to talk about them, sometimes that can be a training update on its own. It really can. And then, of course, keeping people up to date with their inclusive leadership skills. If new thinking comes in, discuss it. And then finally, thinking about technology tools. So use technology. We're all talking about AI at the moment, aren't we? AI is the thing, it's the key words at the moment. But if we're thinking about the ways in which we can use AI tools, and for example, there is one that I particularly favour, and we've been talking about bias quite a lot. If you use some technology, some AI tools to help you with your bias, to remove that maybe in job descriptions. Textio is a really good AI tool that helps you remove bias in job descriptions. So using, those tools to help you manage your bias, especially when we're thinking about self-awareness, these things are key. And thank you very much, Emily, for putting that in the chat there, because yes, there it is. It's really, really helpful. Really, really helpful to help you start to think about that. So textio.com. And I do believe that we are now coming into land now. So this is what we've done today in the last 45 minutes. I hope and pray that it's been useful for you. Thank you for the lovely comments in the chat there. And I hope that we have gone through thinking about how we welcome new staff in an inclusive way and what makes an inclusive leader and how we can hear every voice, and some practical tips there that, granted, I whistle stopped through, but we only have a certain amount of time, and I wanted to make sure that you got as much as you could within the time that we had. And so we are now into our Q&A section. So I'm now going to have a quick sip of my drink and maybe find out if we've got any questions waiting for us. Thank you so much. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, thank you so much, Audrey. That was an amazing presentation. I loved every moment of it. I've written so many notes. I think there was definitely a few things that stuck out to me. So make sure you ask Audrey some questions in the Q&A box. There is one from Abby. So Abby says, do you have tips on getting people to be more self-aware when they think their way is the best way and others are at fault/wrong?
Oh, what a great question. So how to get people to be more self-aware? Yeah, I guess so. I think one of the things that you could do is to maybe have an exercise where which starts off and it can build up. It could be simply about an appreciation. You could do, sometimes I call this the appreciation circle, where you get people to talk about one key trait or one key thing that you really admire in them. And so you can get that, and you can maybe do a couple of rounds of that so that people feel kind of good because the item ultimately you're wanting people to feel good. And then what you might want to do is to think about one key thing. So maybe do two lots of things that are good, and then maybe one key thing that maybe somebody might want to, an area of challenge, if you like. I often call them areas for development or areas of challenge. One key point that you would give, that everyone can give about one another, about something that they would like to see them improve on. And so when it's done with love, when it's done in a facilitated way, it enables people to be able to feel. So again, it's that trust, it's that psychological safety of people being able to express and saying, yeah, Sophie, I love your hair. Sophie, I love the way in which you are able to explain things. But Sophie, one thing I would love you to be able to do is that when we are working in groups, maybe you could speak out a bit more. So something like that. So it's done in such a way that it's, the love, the thing that I would love to see you really improve on. That might be a good way of starting. I think when they think that they are right, I think initially the thing to think about is the fact that they are going to think they're right. So at this point, don't try to say they're wrong. Don't go into it thinking, oh, I've got to say that I'm right and you're wrong. I think the idea is that you're trying to get them to think of it from a different way. So you're thinking about it from a very much a coaching perspective. So at this point, all you're doing is trying to gather some information that enables them to be able to recognize maybe something that they could do better. That might be the approach and the way in. The way to start thinking about it, about somebody being right and wrong, is when we start to get these barriers, and that's when we start to get the breakdown of that trust. So maybe it's about questioning it in a different way, or posing that question in a different way rather than right and wrong, thinking about areas of challenge and things that we are doing really well already.
I love that. I think having those positive aspects as well stops makes it come from a place of trust, and people are less likely to react defensively to that as well, and be more open.
100. And they'll hear it. They'll listen to it. Yeah.
We've got a question from Jess. So Jess says, how would you encourage direct reports to speak up when it's maybe their manager or leader who are using non-inclusive language or bias?
Oh yeah, this is a good one. So I think when you've got situations like that, and it is tricky, there are a couple of ways in which you could do it. It may well be, depending on the systems that you've already got within the organization, if there is a system, and I'm not necessarily saying whistleblowing or anything like that, but if there is a system where people can give feedback anonymously, that could be one way of pursuing it. And it's a shame that it gets to that, because in a way, I would say that's probably one of the last ways in which you should pursue that. In the first instance, it could simply be, and this is something that I definitely do, and I've created some like conversational prompts that enables people to be able to do exactly what you've just asked. So one of the things that I have within this document that I produce, which is called Inclusio Talk, is just to talk about the idea about when you need to challenge something. So it could be something along the lines of saying, okay, I've heard what you've said, and what I am finding is that, or words to that effect. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I've heard that. From my perspective, I believe that. So what you're trying to do is to isolate what's been said and to take it as objectively as you can, and to point out objectively what that is. The problem, I suppose, and I suppose the kind of the real thing behind this question is about when you've got that status imbalance, when you've got somebody who's been working somewhere for a long time and someone who's maybe just entered the organization and they're thinking, I can't say that. So it may well be that if you can't say it, that it's something that needs to be written down, or there needs to be some form of system that enables that to happen. Or there's somebody else that you can, maybe an intermediary or somebody that's also of the same status, that can kind of have, if you like, a three-way conversation that can facilitate that conversation to take place. Ultimately, I suppose my answer is that you would use some form of prompt that would enable them to be able to do that. It could be simply along the lines of, if it's bias or some form of derogatory or non-inclusive language, something along the lines of, okay, so what is making you come to that conclusion that means that you are utilizing that particular way of being? That is another way of doing it as well. Yeah. There are many ways, and I mean we're going to run out of time, so unfortunately I would probably elongate my answer a little more, but ultimately one of those ways in which I've suggested it, isolate what it is that they're saying and asking them to maybe reiterate and to talk about a little bit about why they've come up with that conclusion, and also just to think about, well, from my perspective, I'm finding that maybe this is a bit challenging because, and if you can't say it, then write it down. That might be a way of facilitating that conversation through a third person as well.
Yeah, I think there's some excellent strategies there, and language is always really important when it comes to discussions like this, removing like the emotion out of it as well, so you can have that kind of really honest discussion.
Yeah, they're hard conversations, but they need to be had. But
we've run over by 2 minutes, but if anyone has any last questions for Audrey, or we can wrap up. Feel free to connect with Audrey on LinkedIn as well. She's really active there.
I am. I am active on LinkedIn. Yes, it's true.
But thank you so much for an amazing session, Audrey. We've loved every minute. We've got some great comments in the chat.
Lovely.
Everybody registered and attendees will receive the recording after the webinar, and it will also be up on our website, goon.com. Thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully see you soon for our next webinar. Thank you, Audrey, so much.
No problem. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.